It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Jazz hands. As you see, I did a little bit of a redesign behind me. I actually redesigned like the whole wall here. I can't go kind of all the way over. This is what I did yesterday. Hi, Scout. Because after a Lady Bits gets done, I like to do something physical so I can like move around. Don't make that dirty. The patrons got a better look, and of course that means that it's time for, oh crap, where's my there we go. It's time for help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com, Leanna K, as little as $1 a month, and it is correctly spelled. That's still so embarrassing. Yeah, it helps a lot. So much. Continuing support really helps me continue to do videos like Lady Bits that you guys really seem to like. They're building, each one of them is a little bit, better viewed every single time, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the actual feedback, your comments. Oh, wow. A lot of really great points. Obviously, I can't get through them. I tried to amalgamate as many as I could, kind of general discussion topics. I made notes. Yes, my notepad has cats on it. I'm not obsessed. No, really. That was sort of the first thing. I was really glad that people liked the Momo stuff. It may sound dumb because it's just a silly thing, but every time you change up the format on something, it's a risk, and some people don't like it and some people do like it. Some people just don't like change, but you guys really seem to like it. One guy got mad at me and said I failed to make a valid point and all that stuff. Versus mode is not about making a valid point. Versus mode is about having a laugh about fights. You claim, I'm gonna unsub. People that leave comments saying they're gonna unsub. They comment again and again and again, and they claim they unsub, but somehow they're still watching the videos to comment on them. But yeah, versus mode was never about making a point. It was always about kind of making fun of the bickering that goes on in gaming. It's deliberately in the middle of the show somewhere to lighten things up, because otherwise it's a show about dense philosophical concepts in history, which to a lot of people is about as exciting as dry toast. I don't understand that. I'm a nerd. I love the historical stuff, and people were right that it was only like a sliver of history. I really, part of my hope is if I sort of wet your whistle on this stuff, you'll go back and delve into it, because so much of it is so complex. Ancient Greek cultures plural, are fascinating. The differences between, the different factions, worshiping the different gods. And I mean, Aristotle being an Athenian was really relevant. The different ways the different city-states treated women. It's funny, they all fought the treatment of the other city-states of women. They all thought everybody else was weird. It's fascinating. Now, I do have to say, one comment criticized me for getting the ancient Greek opinion of women wrong. I never claimed I was talking about all ancient Greeks. I was talking about Aristotle. Aristotle went wildly away from Plato. He disagreed with Socrates on certain things. The thing I found so interesting is how much of opinion on this thought came down to one guy. And as far as I can tell, his thinking was anomalous, that this happens. It's, the original concept of memes, not the funny pictures online. Pieces of thought. Is it Dawkins? Yeah, it was Dawkins that came up with this idea that sometimes little packets of thought just spread. And it's interesting to see how they did it. It was sort of this confluence of events. And like so many cultural points, if something is useful, it spreads. And that's why I go crazy when people start going on about cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation is inevitable. It is cultural misappropriation or forcing another people to adopt a culture. That is the issue with things like colonialism, taking an indigenous group and forcing them to adopt the colonial culture can have really negative impacts on a people because it wrecks rites of passage that are really important to identity. More on that later if I ever do a show on focusing more on the masculine side of gender theory. I already have a concept for that, but I don't know, that's something we're going to talk about after Lady Bits is done. Lady Bits season 1, it could go a couple different directions. I have 3 main ideas about what happens next with this stuff, but that's going to be discussed with patrons because they're the ones that financially support this content. So again, become a patron. But moving on, people checked me for not referencing the Khajiit in well, before I get into that, someone also pointed out, and I knew I screwed this up, and it was one of those things that kind of worked, but I was so more focused on poor Momo that I mispronounced. Is it Kate She? It's actually pronounced, I said cat seed, and I knew that was wrong at the time, but it kind of worked in the kind of topic of it, so I left it. I don't know what was going on with me that episode. I was mispronouncing names. It's like a brain fart. It's like the end of winter kind of thing. I'm just seasonal affective disorder stupid, but I mispronounced Aloy's name twice in 2 different ways from Horizon Zero Dawn. I ended up just cutting it out because it was so embarrassing. I said Alloy at one point, easy mistake. Aloe at another point. Oh god, it was something else too. Like I got it wrong, and I know it's Aloy. It's weird how that happens sometimes, that you just sort of flub, your brain farts. But yeah, it was not my best day for sure on that point. But as I was saying, people checked me for not including the Khajiit in the versus mode thing, and I did leave out a few characters, one for time and flow, but also I'd made a Khajiit joke where Momo was involved in episode 4, and I didn't want to repeat it because there was so much other stuff. So that was sort of deliberate. Yes, I love the Khajiit. You know that thing where if you love something, you don't want to talk about it too much because you think everybody's sick of hearing how much you like it? I am a Khajiit player. When I play an Elder Scrolls game, I play as Khajiit. In part because I like that they're the race nobody likes, and they're these weird sort of not totally trustworthy. It's like me playing against type sort of thing, but I love all the moon sugar and all that stuff, and the fact that they're like Orientalist furries. I just love that element. And one of my big disappointments in Skyrim is that the fact that if you played as Argonian or Khajiit, it didn't matter, even though the Nords are like crazy racist. It was sort of disappointing from a role-playing perspective. But then I have to remember that those Bethesda games, those big sandboxy games, they are not really role-playing games. They are fantasy simulators and sci-fi simulators on the Fallout side. And I keep forgetting that I want them to be RPGs so badly. More on that in a bit. I want to continue the Momo stuff. One person, very clever, asked about whether I intentionally put a female internal voice on a male cat. Part of that was necessity. Part of it was intentional. I originally thought about getting my husband to do that voice. And then I thought, but the whole purpose of versus mode is me fighting with myself. That's part of the funny thing. And then I did realize, like, yeah, I mean, the funny thing about Momo is he is a very gender non-conforming kitty cat. He raised kittens, complete with them slobbering his tummy. But it was partially format. It's nice when, as an artist or a creator, you set a format and you stay true to that format, and the format takes you in the right direction, that if you were just going based on your own sort of feels, you might go in the wrong direction. So it was sort of by necessity. Also, I just like doing voices, and I don't get to show off my voice acting, for lack of a better term. I did enjoy the Loki bit too. I love you. You know, one of my big complaints is that it's harder for women to do comedic voices that aren't all up here. You know, I do Harley Quinn all the time because that's like one of the most acceptable things. But Sunflare. Okay, I'll try to stay out of it. I like doing the funny, goofy voices. I love goblin voices. I love doing the goblin voices. You don't get a ton of opportunity to do that because a lot of the sort of known monster voice people are men. And so it's interesting. They hire dudes to do those voices and then they pitch them up. Just because they don't think about it. But I love doing goblin voices. And, I like the sort of my take on Doug the dog meets Big Bird. That's what I was sort of going on for Loki. I'm cute and I love you. I don't know. I like it. Yeah, it's, yes, I would love to say it was completely deliberate from the choice to make some sort of political statement there, or apply theory in practice. That sort of came as a response to me following my own rules, which is why I sort of set core mandate and format, and I don't break them unless there's a really, really good reason, because it does make you better. I think to hit certain rules. That's part of the reason I like interactive storytelling more than linear stuff, because it's too easy for a TV writer or a film director just to break a rule they've set for themselves because it's convenient. In a game, it's a lot harder to do that, because that means you have to kind of rework the gameplay to make this fit. And I think it actually makes them better being forced by the gameplay to keep your world building consistent. I hate world building errors. A good world building, there are a lot of good writers out there. Good world builders are a much rarer skill. Somebody like a J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a much better world builder than he was a writer. He was a good writer. He was a good world builder. It was his storytelling that he borrowed heavily from myth, but I'm digressing. One of the comments, should I tackle this now? Yeah, I'll tackle this now. Somebody said I should do a sort of joke video about Momo going on about feline representation in video games. I will consider that. Patrons are gonna get a real backfired attempt at Momo wearing a costume. It failed so badly that I just couldn't do it to him. The video will not be public. That'll be for patrons, and then the DVD for Kickstarter backers. That'll end up, because oh my god, the poor guy. It was stupid, and I realized it was stupid, and I couldn't do that to my poor kitty. But one guy, he's a game reviewer, lost it on me because I made the comment about Heavenly Sword. And this was a really interesting comment. A lot of people focused on this one aside. There's always one aside I'll make. This wasn't the one I thought it was going to be. I thought people were going to get upset about the Aristotle said this, which was very male of him, and I was really careful to make a follow that up with a similar joke about women. So I was being sort of an equal opportunity offender, and that seemed to work, because that was, of course, followed up by the crack about romance novels. So, you know, when you bash equally, it's gender equality of opportunity and gender bashing. But this one guy absolutely freaked out on me about the comments I made about Heavenly Sword. Within the industry, and there's certain barbershop talk that, you know, people don't like me because I talk about this stuff. I don't name names, but there's this idea of, oh, don't tell the unwashed masses the things we talk about internally, even though now all the GDC talks are online, which I disagree with. I think developers need a place to speak freely. I think that there should only be a few tracks of paneling. I think that the stuff at GDC behind closed doors, because as somebody who's done really insider stuff, it's so much jargon that you should be able to speak behind closed doors sometimes, but that's not what I'm talking about here. And this is a topic for another time. I need a half hour on this just alone because it can be misconstrued. But my comment that Heavenly Sword was judged by what reviewers at the time thought games should be, as opposed to what Heavenly Sword was. And this is a huge point of contention between game reviewers and game consumers who want to be advised on their purchases more than they especially care about the particular opinions of this reviewer. And, you know, back in the day when reviews were done by newspapers, they had one or two and you sort of got used to what a reviewer thought about things. And so certain times they were very, very helpful to you. Other times it's like, well, that reviewer has that bias. I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. In the age of Metacritic and aggregated reviews, that's less easy to do. And there's usually a lot more game writers at a site, like game reviewers at a site, than movie reviewers. There's usually like 2 movie reviewers. There's a lot more game reviewers, just because it takes longer. You can see 4 movies in a day. I don't think that's a great review process, but you can do it. You can watch like 8 to 10 movies in the time it takes you to go through even, you know, your basic game. Never mind the 60-hour monstrosities we ended up with. But, you know, I loop this back to my comments about Skyrim and Fallout and how I always glance off those games because I want them to be RPGs, and they're not RPGs in the sense that me as an old tabletop player sees an RPG, which is, you know, a game where you actually role play. You choose alignments and this, that, and the next thing, and you have to stay in character. That's not what Fallout and Skyrim are. And I couldn't figure out, because I love the old Interplay Fallout games. Fallout New Vegas is my favorite modern Fallout game because it had that humor. It had more of the feel that the original Fallout games did, because it's more of the original developers, but I digress again. I could never figure out why these games were so popular, and then I realized I'm coming at them wrong. They are not for me. They're for people. I have a friend, she absolutely loves Fallout, and she spends a lot of time farting around just making her own little homestead, for lack of a better term. And when I approach Fallout, because I played the old Interplay games, I want that story, that strong story-driven fallback to the isometric RPGs of yore, and it's not that. And I have to keep that in mind. And I was an asshole to Fallout 3, and I was an asshole to Skyrim because I didn't understand what the intent was for those games. And so I'm not talking about anything I don't have to check in myself. As a game reviewer, it's not just about whether you like a game or you don't like a game. You have to figure out who will like this game. If it is not to your taste, you have to be aware of that and be very clear about what is not to your taste and what is actually a mistake. I'm really surprised more people didn't check me on the BioShock Infinite comment, because, oh God, there was a time you could not criticize that game. And then, of course, it turned out that that game was a hot mess. Most irrational games do tend to be hot mess development processes, but apparently that one was completely off the charts. I heard from somebody who worked on Heavenly Sword that they said that huge portions of that game had to be pulled out to ship on time. That's a real shame. But I still think that the game they made was good. It was one of those kill with skill type things that you played through, and then you replayed and you replayed and you replayed to get those 5 stars, and the combat was so beautiful that and huge, and like, we don't think of it anymore because this sort of scope happens all the time now, but at the time it was like, whoa, the scope of those battles and the quality of the motion capture. I mean, Andy Serkis, the guy who's like Gollum and Caesar and Planet of the Apes and like the motion capture guy, came in and worked. He's King Bohan on Heavenly Sword. He was like an advisor to the motion capture process, and it was a huge leap forward in motion capture. And I think when you recognize that a game is tackling that sort of resource heavy thing, you have to reward the attempt. And I felt like game critics didn't. That was at the time, it was a very early PlayStation 3 title, not quite a launch title. It was trendy to crap on PS3 games because that was the time of, oh, PlayStation's old news. Yeah, Xbox, because Xbox was the new upstart. They'd managed to get a shooter that was successful on console, because believe it or not, there was a time that shooters were a PC format. Personally, I think it still is. If somebody could make a smaller keyboard so that my tiny little pinky finger didn't have to stretch so hard, I would still play keyboard and mouse. I can play Metro and Doom keyboard and mouse because those are excellently designed shooters that actually I'm not fumbling on keyboard. The more console, I mean, Halo is a shooter designed for consoles. Gears of War is a shooter. It's a third-person shooter. I know, not a first-person shooter, but they are designed for consoles. You can tell. I personally dislike aim assist, but you really do need them in those console-based shooters. They because you are, you know, those 2 sticks, for somebody who's only played that way, that feels intuitive for them. But when you have that 1-to-1 of the mouse, you guys can't see it, I'm like moving my mouse around. Once you get that 1-to-1, oh man, it doesn't feel so good when you're farting around with those twin sticks. But again, you know, when you review a shooter made for console, or like Halo Wars, trying to get RTSs to work on console didn't work as well as the shooter Halo, but valid attempt, like, to even get a game playable on console. If somebody only has an Xbox, they don't have a gaming PC, and they want to see what these strategy games are all about, Halo Wars is perfectly fine for them. And that's the purpose of being a professional game reviewer as opposed to being a game critic where you shit on things for money. I have no interest in that. There's a place for it, fine. But moving on, this is going to be a really long Feedback Friday. I apologize. But somebody else brought up the lack of discussion of side characters. That was for time. I'm trying not to repeat examples too much, though I end up mentioning Bayonetta in every single freaking show because she's just so much yes in so many examples of what of these topics. She's like this intersection point of everything. I could do a whole episode on because Bayonetta. It would be cool to do little 15-20 minute character studies breakdown on individual characters. That might be a future series, because you guys seem to like the deep dives. The thing about that is if somebody hasn't played the game, they're kind of left out. But it's tough. It's that numbers game versus wanting that meaty content, because I know that's the stuff I like as a gamer, and that's the stuff that you like as a gamer. Just recommend it to your gaming friends so that other people who can appreciate that stuff. Somebody mentioned I didn't mention Samus Aran. Samus was in a future draft. A past draft of this show. She was mentioned. I have mentioned Samus in other shows. First of all, I think Samus is kind of talked to death. And the reason I cut her out is Samus's gender does not inform the gameplay of the original Metroid in the slightest. The whole idea was that you weren't supposed to know until she takes off her helmet at the end, or more, depending on how quickly you complete the game, that she's female. It doesn't inform the gameplay in the slightest. So that's an example of a choice that is completely cosmetic. It was a neat cosmetic choice. It added a neat little twist, but back before the internet spoiled everything, it was really cool because you didn't know until you complete the game, and then you had a secret. But I thought that there were more compelling ways to go, and Samus will definitely show up again in future episodes. I'm not worried about that at all. So there's that. I'll go to something funny now with less serious. Somebody else, more than one person, including a good friend of mine, asked me if I was high during versus mode. No, that's just my brain. That's the thing. I have never especially understood drugs because I can do that stuff sober. But I don't binge drink either. The idea of vodka shots is like, why? It doesn't taste like anything. I like my wine, I like my tequila, I like my bourbon, I like my single malt, but those are sipping things, right? They're not, tequila people slam, and that's my bar thing. If people want to do shots, I will only do shots with someone if they are tequila shots, because I'm weird. I actually like the taste of tequila. It has to be good tequila. But yeah, vodka shots, vodka gets you drunk and that's it. Good vodka doesn't taste like much. And when it does taste like much, it's a bad much. But I digress. No, I was not high. That's just what happens when you play as many video games for as long as I do. It doesn't make you violent. It makes you super creative in a trippy way. Somebody actually called out, and this was fair criticism because I wasn't clear. I said something about men with boobs, and people said that's gender conformativity and it's enforcement of gender norms and things like that. And that's not actually what I meant. I actually meant that they were male wireframes they stuck boobs on, which happens more than you think. And oh my God, you can tell. When people find skeletons, they can tell whether it's a male skeleton or a female skeleton because they look different. And a lot of developers for a long time cheaped out before motion capture catalogs. They cheaped out and it was all the same wireframes. That's what I meant. So fair enough. There was no way to clarify. I didn't think it was going to be that big of an issue, but yes, fair enough. I have clarified. Quite a few people ask why I hate The Sims. I believe it's episode 3 where I comically discuss my issues with The Sims. It is played for laughs. Don't take it too seriously, but The Sims do scare me. Okay, how do I combine the next thing? A lot of positive feedback about my comments about the whole X-Bro generation and how that was really when things got really bad regarding playable characters and women and Go Home Gamer Girl and all that shit. I'm gonna save some of this for the historical retrospective episodes, the stuff about the 80s, 90s, 2000s. The 80s one's going to be tough because I need to do a little bit of a nod to the 70s, but do it quick. But that's the truth of every episode. There's always too much to put in. But I was really surprised how many people identified with that and went right on. I thought that was going to be somewhat controversial. Um, I'm glad that most people got that when I deliberately said ex-bros, because not everybody who got into gaming through the Xbox is an ex-bro. It is a subset. But it definitely became this cultural thing that gaming suddenly became associated with douchebags. And I know that's an ironically gendered thing because a douchebag is a feminine hygiene product that nobody uses anymore. The word of the meaning of the word is changed to someone resembling a cast member from Jersey Shore. But it's funny how radically the stereotype of gamer shifted from milquetoast nerd in the 80s to, D&D player in the parents' basement type thing to this aggressive dude bro type guy, almost like a PC principal type. When you see that shift, and the thing is, a lot of people have not been around long enough, like me, oh God, to have seen that shift. It really did go from really play game? Oh, cool. And that was it, right? It was disbelief, then, probably a bit of a nerd check, which is annoying but understandable. But to acceptance, and then sort of this excitement, and I don't like this sort of reverence, like, whoa, you're a girl who likes games. No, I just like games. There should be no special status because I'm female. I like the same games you do for a lot of the same reasons you do. Let's not make this weird. But, and I understand it's a compliment, and I take it as such, a guy in the industry. Now this is considered an offensive statement, but when he said it at first, I thought it was hilarious because it was kind of true. He says, you know more about games than anybody with a vagina should. And it was just such a great turn of phrase. And that's the sort of thing of, yeah, I get that that's the attitude. I think that's unnatural. But I really did feel, and you see it in all of the marketing, once the Xbox came out, because it was sort of that Red Bull advertising base, that Mountain Dew and Doritos, they really pulled it to dude bro, extreme sports, UFC, that kind of Spike TV space. And gaming now seems very fractured, but whole. South Park. Love that game. Another game with a pretty open-ended character creation system akin to Saints Row in its own way. Check that out. Very funny. Just skewering of identity politics in a way that doesn't just shit all over the concept of being nice to people who are different. Well done, South Park. But it's split into the type of gamer that conforms to that ex-bro stereotype that the mainstream is aware of, and then the actual reality of people who actually are gamers, not people who, and this is no slight on people who buy these games, it is just a type. It is like a demographic. You have those guys who just buy their Madden, their NBA 2K, maybe MLB The Show, FIFA, maybe. One of those, two of those four sort of thing. They buy them every year, and then they buy, did I mention NBA? Anyway, 2 sports games, and then they buy their Call of Duty or their Battlefield. And that's pretty much all they'll spend on games. And they'll just play those games over and over and over and over and over again because they're comfortable. They're pick up and play. The thing about shooters is they are so damn easy to learn the basics of. But they self-identify as gamers. But to someone who plays stuff like Disgaea and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, they are also gamers. They've probably been playing games a lot longer to even know about those games. You know, it is a completely different type of gamer. And that type of gamer doesn't like the stereotype of the ex-bro gamer, because the ex-bros beat those guys up in school. And this is a dynamic in gaming that... And this is where another question, this is why I brought it up now, so I could seg into this part. One person asked, and it's a really good question, if I believe that the demands for female playable characters, the criticisms for female playable characters, is a backlash to the ex-bro decade. And of course it is, but I think it goes deeper than that, and that's why I wanted to address this, because there's a double backlash going on right now, and this is important to understand. And this is where sort of my anthropology background comes in handy, because I've been sitting here and observing and looking at it from what various subcultures do for the people who partake in these subcultures, and I think it just works better. But of course I say that. I joke about sociology all the time, but it really is a completely different way of thinking. You have the, I don't want to say female and male allies, because I hate those terms. You have a subset of the Xbox generation that did start playing games about that time. They might have come in at the tail end of the PS2 era, but I mean, the user base for the Xbox is completely different. The console war era of Xbox into Xbox 360 versus the PS2 into PS3, that era that I do believe started with Halo, because Halo was that big killer app. It was a reason to buy an Xbox, the way Tomb Raider was for the PlayStation. And the fact that Tomb Raider was the PlayStation killer app just shows that, no, this idea that men won't play as women, that's a new thing. And it drives me crazy how embedded it got. Again, I'm giving stuff away from my historical retrospective episodes, but there you have it. You had people who started playing games on the PlayStation 3, the Xbox 360. They have no experience from what came before. They may have read about it, but they didn't experience it the way I did. You know, they don't have that experience of playing games before the ESRB existed. And when I said, you know, Resident Evil was the Night of the Living Dead of our generation, it's because it was a zombie thing, much like Night of the Living Dead, that slipped in just under the wire of the implementation of the rating system. In Resident Evil's case, it was the ESRB. In Night of the Living Dead, it was the MPAA. And so that was sort of the last traumatizing game that really didn't have a rating on it. And so we had no idea what we were getting into, and we thought zombie games, you know, anything with zombies in it was, you know, something like Altered Beast. It was like a side-scroller or something, you know, that graveyard scene where the skeleton guys came after you, stuff like that. Golden Axe, shit like that. We had no idea what we were getting into with Resident Evil. Like, the sounds were probably more of it, because you look at that, you know, that weird clown zombie right at the beginning who like, they're munching over a corpse and then they turn around like, and then you get control back and you run away, and you can't shoot and run at the same time. So it's like, bam, and you're like, what is going on? It's like that first scene in Dead Space where you aim for the head and nothing happens. But that was terrifying. And those freaking hunters with the, like, I don't know, sound. I hate those things. But we had no idea what we were getting into. Survival horror? What? I mean, Clock Tower was survival horror before that. Resident Evil, there's just nothing like it. And it screwed me up in the best of ways, just like Transformers the movie probably did. But unless you were there, You can read about it, but that's not the same as experiencing it. Same with arcades. Um, Going to an arcade like a Dave and Buster's or at the movie theater or something like that. There's a great place in Toronto now called the Rec Room. Uh, I like it because the food's better than Dave and Buster's, and it's a cooler format. You get little bracelets for beeping the machine, and that's easier to keep track of. But and there's a coat check. But it's just, I just like it. Shameless plug. I'm not getting any money for this, but that is sort of, yes, it's an arcade, but it's not the same as back in the day where you could only play video games in arcades unless you were PC gaming, which were completely different experiences. I'm talking of stuff like King's Quest and, the Sierra Adventures. That was the only place to play games. You watched sort of pinball being slowly replaced. I know, pinball, I'm dating myself. But you watched pinball slowly be replaced by these cabinet arcade games. And the sampling was a totally different thing. And in a way, I wish we could have this experience for console games where they are set up arcade style. And could you imagine if you walked in a place and there were like 40 of the current console games and you could go in there and play them arcade style, 15 minutes per meep or whatever, and you could try them out for a relatively affordable price. That way you can sample them. And I remember Mortal Kombat was the first, it was Street Fighter 2. Street Fighter 2 before Mortal Kombat, but they were around the similar time. But those are the first ones that you played in the arcade, but then you used the home version to practice, and then you back to the arcade. The only problem was there were slight differences between the two versions. So I still got my ass kicked. You literally had to dump in those quarters. I couldn't afford it. I could never get very good. So I ended up going, I'll watch people who are really good playing Street Fighter, but then I'll go home and play for free. Because I'd rather put my quarters into a different game that I thought was cooler. But, now console's dominant and arcade is sort of like, it's a completely different experience. Again, if you weren't there, you don't know. And so you have this is going somewhere, I swear to God. It's not that my experience is more valid. It's not that I am more right than someone who started gaming in the, 2005-ish. Because that person's still been playing for 10 years now. They have a reasonable knowledge of games. It's just a different experience. And so their experience was they entered into an environment that was very hostile to people who were different. No different than if you'd walked into a frat house. I mean, women walking into a frat house, that's usually the beginning of an episode of Law and Order, or Criminal Minds. And that was more, but they don't have the concept of it because they never saw it any other way. I, on the other hand, felt it change. All of a sudden, I was getting not bewilderment, but hostility. And the game I really felt it on was Halo 3. Because, oh God, I didn't give it a 10 out of 10. I gave it an 8, which I thought was a very fair score. Generous. In fact, now I would probably give it a 7. Or was that the first one with the Forge? I think that boosted it a point for me, just because the Forge was kind of cool tech. But I thought that was a very fair score, but oh God, no. They freaked out. Because they were importing this, my school, my town, my state, my, everything like that, my team, and it was, we're number one. And it's this weird kind of tribal thing where you attack the other team, and it's like Yankees fans and Mets fans. And this was an importation of culture, whereas before it was much more that systemized nerd thinking, you know, the people who play Doom on their work computer as shareware. What's shareware? Yeah, exactly. Shareware. My husband always laughs when I tell him about shareware. But it is a mindset because, I mean, shareware now is crowdfunding, right? Same drive, slightly different economic model. But, you know, I felt it change. And this is something we do have to talk about because, like I said, it's not that the perspective of these people who came into it during that era and started off with really bad experiences. I can't imagine what my perspective would be if it started that way. That would really suck. But then there was also, I did notice, because women were relatively rare, you did get a certain amount of front of the line stuff. People just gave you stuff. And that made me vaguely uncomfortable because I felt like I was being handicapped. But, you know, for all to start the game, press start. Oh, you know what to do. The number of demos I did at E3 where I'm like, yeah, I got this. Because I hate being walked through. If you have to walk me through a game, then your controls aren't intuitive. I have played enough games. Tell me what kind of game it is. Give me the basics. All right, I should be able to figure it out. But for all of that, there were perks, for lack of a better term, for being an other. You know, people tried to be chivalrous. As women became more accepted as professionals, those perks have slowly started to erode. And I can see people who don't see them for what they are, which was basically professional easy mode, feeling like the treatment is getting worse instead of better, instead of recognizing that, no, you're not getting that glad handing anymore because now you're being seen as more of an equal, so you're getting treated as shitty as all the guys who just stood there in line for 3 hours. And it sucks that the form of equality that it's been experienced in the video game industry is that everybody gets treated worse. It shouldn't be that. It should be everybody's treated better as the industry matures, but that's not what's happening. But instead of recognizing, congratulations, you are now seen as a more legitimate professional, which means the publishers are now going to start treating you like dog shite. Also, guess what? If you have a predominantly female audience, most game developers really don't give a shit whether they give you a game or not, unless, you know, they get good person points for doing it. I watched this happen, and because I had the perspective, I can say this stuff. Now, a lot of people don't want to hear it. A lot of people ignore me for that. But I kind of believe that if you have something important to say, you can just keep saying it until somebody starts listening, because eventually there will be a desire for that knowledge once everybody comes out of their protective crouch. But do I think that the opinion of somebody who started in the next pro generation is invalid? No. I get that they had bad experiences, and like I said, if my first experiences with gaming were that bad, I'd probably be better too. And they obviously like games enough to keep playing them, even though they had those shitty experiences. Now, however, there's this whole other cohort, and I know that it took me 12 minutes to get here. Sorry. But there are people like me, only they're dudes. Meaning people who started gaming when King's Quest 1 was new. I remember Pong. Sork for the win. Man, those text-based, there's still a magic to them. That you have to sort of read and imagine and, oh man, okay, focus. Those OGs, original gamers, who are male, are being lumped in with the X-Bros. And they don't like the X-Bros either. So there's this two contingents. Why am I using pens? Two contingents of gamers who have both been picked on by the dude bros. So you've got the women who came into the gaming with the dude bros, and then you've got the OGs, original gamers, little people first, who both have issues with the dude bros. But one is looking at the other and saying, you're the dude bro. And this is going, fuck off, no, I'm not. And there's this hostility and they fight, and all the dude bros are sitting back getting treated like the real gamers. And the dude bros aren't. They're the freaking problem. They're also not the ones who tend to engage on forums unless they're just trolling. They do not have the same passion for games as an art form because, like I said, they only buy 3 games a year and they're the same fucking titles. And that's what's going on. You've got misplaced blame. You've got, the XX girl, the Xbox contingent, and you got the OG contingent, and the Xbox contingent is misidentifying the OG contingent as dude bros. And I'm sure you can see as X bros, and I'm sure you can see that the OGs don't like that very much because that's a lot of trauma coming up. Like, imagine if you got compared to that person who picked on you in school. That's exactly what's happening to the OGs. And this is something that's important to understand. And people accuse me of placating the people who are the problem. And no, this stuff's real. Like, if you talk to these people for 5 minutes, yes, they're male. Yes, they play games, and they may play some of those shooters. For the longest time, there wasn't anything else to really play. But they don't share that mentality. And when they say, look, I have no problem playing as women, like, I just want you to stop yelling at me, believe them. Listen and believe. And I do think that has become toxic, and you see that with underclasses all the time. People tend to fight amongst themselves, and I won't mention them because I always get in freaking trouble when I do. Oh, phone. But yeah, I gotta call this person back. So I'll wrap there. I hope you enjoy it. Have a good weekend. Gotta take this phone call. Thanks. Bye.